want to take you back in time a little bit here and ask you what's your first musical moment that you can remember going back into your childhood, and where did it happen and why?
Okay. Um, I would have to say, based on the fact that both of my parents were pretty well-known jazz musicians, it happened at home. And it happened around the record player because both of my parents listened avidly to records. And as a result, I did too. And I was subjected to all they knew. And it was everything from Ray Charles' Atlantic Sides to Ella in Berlin, Ella Fitzgerald in Berlin. And, people sometimes say to me things like, well, how did you end up being a singer? A lot of us fancy ourselves becoming singers. And I say, well, maybe it was because when I was 8 years old, racing around the dining room table, screaming or trying to replicate Ella Fitzgerald's Ooh, What a Little Moonlight Can Do, scat singing solo. My mother said, watch your pitch. She didn't say, shut up. And it must have been a howl. So I'd say that was one of my fondest early memories of that encouragement.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Long Branch, New Jersey, in a humble little house on Westwood Avenue.
And your parents, as jazz players, talk about your parents a little bit. What kind of
Okay.
jazz did they play? What were their roots?
Okay, this is really easy. Hold on one moment. This was my father's last.
Oh, wow.
Did the calligraphy for this, so that's.
Look at that. That's fantastic. So that's he played with all these guys?
Yeah.
Played with Goodman, huh? Wow. Well, you got to talk about this a little bit because this is very interesting.
So, and my mom worked at, I'm staring right now south because I'm up high at the Empress Motel, and my mother, she performed there noteworthily because it's still there, but she was kind of a local jazz hero. And she imported a lot of wonderful jazz musicians out of New York and used local people that were great, like Tal Farlow, people like that. So I have a really hefty background. I had a lot to live up to.
And how about your father? I mean, your father played with quite a bit of very well-known, almost legendary performers at Goodman on down. What's his background?
His background, he came from New Haven, and he took the name Lowell off the side of a bus coming from Lowell, Massachusetts. Actually, I'm writing about this now. I'm doing it's not really, it's a fictional narrative, but it's got memoirs ensconced, and a lot of it is true. So leave that to people's imaginations if I can get anyone to read this book. But anyway,
that's true. He did it. He actually took your last name from Lowell, Massachusetts.
Side of a bus. Yeah, he thought that.
Why was that? What was his name before that?
Our native name on his side was Lubitz, Lubitz, and it's one of those names that would be hard to remember. And I'm not sure if he had some kind of anti-Semitic issues with that too. It might have been back then. Things were not what they are now. So.
That's right. No, my grandmother also had her name changed as well. It was too Italian. It was too ethnic, and they took the I and the O off and tried to Americanize them. It was something that people did back in the day, didn't it?
Yeah. And I took the name out of pride, for my parents.
Sure.
Mother name, and then I took it.
So he was a drummer. He toured with these acts, recorded with them as well?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And in the big bands, you wouldn't see the names listed. There were too many people or something, or they just didn't care. I never figured that out. That was a strange fate of archiving back then. You couldn't, everybody read album covers, and you couldn't find my father's name on a lot of these things.
So clearly you come from quite a bit of pedigree here when it comes to music.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I was the prodigal daughter who just took a whole different twist. I did study jazz a lot. I put in a couple of years at the New England Conservatory of Music trying to play sax because I was shy about singing, and I was trying to come out of the box like a hot dog singer, and I got kicked out of my first band because I couldn't scream over the loudness or something like that. So I studied jazz pretty intensely for the first couple of years of my life.
So you graduate from Long Beach High School, I presume?
Long Branch, yeah.
Long Branch High School, I'm sorry. Long Branch High School. What year do you graduate?
I'm a 70.
Okay, so you 70. So that's pretty much the time when everything Asbury is really popping in terms of rock and roll.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go back to that time. What are your recollections there? What were you doing in, aside from going to high school, what were you doing in 67, 68, 69 when the teen clubs were happening? Bruce is playing with Steel Mill and Steve has got his bands. The upstage is happening. Talk about that.
I was sucking it up. I was down there. My mom and dad were great about letting me go out, even when I was like 14. They'd drop me off and pick me up, you know, but I was allowed to stay out late and be in clubs because that was a familiar place. And I was already familiar with them from sitting on daddy's trap case. So they figured I was savvy. And I went to upstage and I saw the blossoming of Bruce and Stevie Van Sant, Southside Johnny. And I met all those guys around that time as well. And I was too shy to sing at that age. You know, so I wasn't doing it. So I was taking it in. And of course, it was mind blowing because it was all over the place. I remember the Hullabaloo Club on the Strip. You know, I went down and I played my pinball machines over at the casino here and by day, and we would just hang out into the night and go to the Sunshine Inn, Student Prince. I attended all those places as much as I possibly could.
So you're not in it during high school. You're not in a band. You're not singing. You're not playing any instruments at this point either. You are a fan.
I did not give a clue as to my talents because I couldn't see myself singing choral music. I had this deep voice. I had been trying to imitate chanteuses from the jazz era. I had this bottomy voice and they wanted me to sing, you know, green lilacs so wet with the dew. I just couldn't see myself doing that. So I wasn't a marching band type. You know, I was already like a covert hipster, you know, in my own mind anyway. And I was drawing subversive cartoons and wanting to identify with the guys who I was seeing. And, you know, it was pretty much, it was a boys' club. You know, you have to know that at that point in time. We're talking 66. And but they were gentlemen. They were really nice people to know when I met them, and they turned me on to all the greats. I mean, I was listening in high school. I was walking around with John Hammond records and Yardbirds and wonderful influences because I was around this milieu of guys that were listening to that stuff, and so I was friendly with them. Let's put it that way.
Right. So it's safe to say that even though your roots, your home roots, your DNA is jazz, but by the time you are a teenager, let's just say, like so many of us at the time, I'm your age as well. We
Great.
we basically explode with rock and roll passion because we're hearing New York radio. And on the Jersey Shore, there's these teen clubs. There's a great scene in Asbury, but there's also the Monmouth College scene in West Long Branch and down by the Inkwell and things like that. So there was a lot for you, I'm sure, to absorb being a young person, as it was for me in terms of this, not just the music, but this emerging culture that was happening.
Yes, and my mother. I have to mention her because, I mean, we used to sit around the piano and play Beatles songs together. My parents embraced all types of music. I mean, my father had a couple of hipster friends from S-Disc, ESP Disc, and I remember hearing the Fugs when I was 14, you know,
Wow.
and he brought in Are You Experienced? So it came to our house.
Wow. So you were very fortunate to have the kind of parents that didn't rebel against what you were doing, but
Not at
actually
all.
encouraged you and told you it helped you along. Very different from mine. My father was a New Jersey state trooper and hated every bit of
Oh
it.
my
So
God.
it was a real battle in my house. But I envy you. It sounded like you had the kind of parents that basically saw value in this, and that's terrific. So do me a favor and kind of pick a scene or something from your memory that best represents that period when you're in high school, you're absorbing, whether it's upstage, on the boardwalk, convention hall, West Lawn Branch, something that will allow me to link a memorable moment with you growing up.
Okay, here's a good one.
Okay.
Um, uh, we know who Tinker is, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You have an interviews with him, just so you know.
Good, because he
Yeah.
was a cog. He was
Yeah.
definitely a cog. And I remember at one point in time, I was friendly with him, and I went to see Janis Joplin, and I think James Cotton was opening up for her, if my memory serves me. And this is Convention Hall, which I was familiar with because I saw Soupy Sales was my first concert there with Del Shannon. And so I was
the Dave Clark 5.
Oh,
yeah,
I think I saw them too.
Yeah, 65. Yeah, go ahead.
But anyway, at some point at a halftime or prior to her performance, and I'm not sure if she did 2 shows because I remember her having a towel around her neck. She was always perspiring profusely after a performance because she gave every ounce of what she had. Anyway, Tinker asked me if I would take her on the rides. And how can you forget this? I mean, I was 16. I was just like, my jaw was to my collarbone. I was just like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And I was terrified of her because she was so sure of herself and body and forthcoming. And she had her little bottle of Southern Comfort in her pocket and this around her neck. And she was like, come on, all right. And we're walking down the boardwalk. And I said, well, which one do you want to go on? And she said, well, I like the looks of that roundup. And so I said, okay, let's go. We stand in little cages and we giggle incessantly until it's over. You're going to like this. And so I remember going on the rides with her, and I was a little bit afraid with the drinking that it wouldn't be such a good outcome, but she had a blast and I had a blast. And thank you, Tinker, for that opportunity. I met my idol.
And what was she an influence on you in terms of singing?
Yeah, because quite bluntly, she was a white girl who could sing soul, and anybody like that, from like Gina Ravon to Lydia Pence to, they were important to me because of course, that color line is a tricky thing to even discuss these days, but I needed that encouragement because all the singers that I loved were well, I wouldn't say all. I loved Peggy Lee. I loved so many. But it was a very powerful influence on me, Black music in every single venue, and I can't deny that.
Yeah.
So.
Were there jazz clubs there that your parents were playing in during the same era that you could have switched from rock to jazz and gone to hear them play or whatever?
Yeah, and I had done that. I played some jazz in clubs around here just before I moved to Manhattan, which is when I became very serious about about backup singing because I thought I could make a living doing that. And I remember being in small clubs trying to do jazz after I came back from the New England Conservatory. And it just seemed like, I remember having ice thrown at me by irate young people who wanted to hear rock probably. And so I was like, heck with this, but that's another whole thread. Let me get back to my mother. My mother had worked in a place called the Barber Shop, which I think was in Spring Lake, or not Spring Lake, I'm sorry. I forget exactly where, but it was around here. But like I say, the Empress Hotel, Bill Green's was on, I think it was right here on Springwood Avenue. And, there was some crossover. There was the Orchid Lounge where Jimmy Smith type players would play. I remember going there as a child. It was like, take me, I wanted to be everywhere they were.
Yeah.
And but my parents both played. So my father played in the Harbor Island Spa, like the big hotels, and in Spring Lake, where they had these big dances and things. It was
Right.
conventional musics, but I learned all that stuff too, and I was able to sing at weddings and things like that. Even though I hate them to this day. I hate doing them. And I hate it. I felt
So
depressed
your your early education is rock and jazz and lots of it from both sides. I mean, that's really amazing. You graduate in 70. Do you go to New England at that point, or you were around in New
Yeah, I did what every young girl does. I climbed in my Army Green standard shift board with my cat on my lap and my congas and my PA system in the back, and I went there to join a soul band that somebody I met on the beach, and for an hour, and I left and went there, and I ended up in Boston studying that at that point.
So you're up in Boston in the early 70s. After the, well, 70, the riots, then there's nothing too much happening in Asbury Park. At this point, had you already met Bruce? Did you know the guys well enough to be part of that scene?
That's a trick question. Uh, well, I had met Bruce, but I wouldn't say that I was friendly with him in a personal way. He uh, he was so directed. I always saw him as somebody who just was like focused, and he was doing what he was doing. But it was actually Southside Johnny I was friendly with, and Vinny Lopez when I was 14. Those guys I actually hung out with, and we would do stuff together. And they were terrific people, to know, because they were enthusiastic about music, and they taught me a few tricks. And I'm trying to think who else I could credit. My cousin Donnie Lubitz was his name. Donnie Lowell.
Yeah.
He took the name Lowell as well. So there were 4 Lowells in the area, and he would come and drag his organ to our back porch. We would have these wonderful parties, my parents, and all these jazz musicians would come down from New York, and we'd have clams on the grill, and we'd have acoustic jazz in the living room, and Donnie would have his Hammond B3 with a Leslie speaker on the patio playing like Howard Tate songs. And so I was getting all this R&B
Yeah.
and a lot of just hands-on jazz. And I still wasn't singing. I was intimidated by my own parents, probably.
Yeah.
They were so incredible. They were all giants to me. So,
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. It's kind of odd that, you seem back then to be shy and lacking in self-confidence when you had such a support system. I would have thought the opposite was true.
no, well, there's a flip side to everything. And the darker side was that everyone was so great that I never thought I could aspire to such heights. That's the dark side of it. When you're little, everyone is so
Yeah.
gargantuan. It takes a while for you to feel that you can fill those shoes.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So when do you return back? When you leave Boston and New England Conservatory, you go back to the Jersey Shore, or do you go to Manhattan?
I came back to the Jersey Shore. I had a stint of trying playing with a couple jazz bands with a guy named Frank Ferrucci. He was our keyboard player. It was a little trio, and I just decided I can't do this. And then there
You
was a
singing? You were singing it. You were singing in the trio.
Oh yeah, I was
Yeah.
singing. I was singing. I was standards and things like that, and throwing in some R&B tunes that I'd already tested, and this was momentous. There was a band. There was a band. They may still play as this, but I don't think they do anymore. They're all separated. But the Blackberry Blues Band with Dave Myers, Paul Dickler, Bruce Stewart, and I'm trying to think who else was playing it. I think that was the core of the band.
That was the
And
core,
George
yeah.
Myers, he was the keyboard player. Memory. Anyway, they would let me sit in with them, and I loved it because I would sing All Your Love and soul standards with them. And one day they played at McKell's in New York, and they took me up there with them. This was a moment in my life. This was
What year? Remember?
I'm thinking, hold on, 76,
Okay.
perhaps. And McKell's was like a hot club, R&B, jazz, anything goes, crossover, less rock. And anyway, so I walk in and there's Howie Wyeth with his band Sneaky Cookin'. And Christine Faith and Rona, and I forget her last name, she was Howie's living girlfriend at the time. Anyway, it was a fantastic band. Tony Kniff was on bass. These are all New York-based people. But Howie Wyeth was on the Rolling Thunder tour. So he was, he was hot dog. Anyway, I meet Christine Faith in the bathroom. And she's this gorgeous strawberry blonde, and she's back up singing. I'm like, oh, I want to be like you. You know, I was like so guileless and like open-hearted, and I just kind of like spilled my guts like that. She went, there's tons of work, Lisa. She was just this wonderful, enthusiastic, open-hearted girl. There's tons of work, backup singers. You should just move here. I was like, I always wanted to move to New York, but I'm so scared and yada, yada. And then there were other key moments, but that was one that I remember because her telling me that there was actually a lot of work for backup singers. And jingles were really rocking then and stuff, but I was terrible at that stuff. That's another whole story. But anyway, Christine was terrific. And so I thought, you know, I can do this. And I came home and I was in this horrible band at the time. And I'm not going to mention their name because that would be gauche. But anyway, it was a top 40 band or something. And I was playing congas and trying to play sax and just, you know, keep it together. And I saved up my money and I headed up, I found an ad on the NYU bulletin board. I'm probably digressing. A girl that was, she was doing the editing for Richard Foreman. She was really hip and she lived in Soho. So I ended up in a loft with my limping cat named Billy Hoppaday. And I went up there and before you know it, I found my piece. It was like that. And having taken that risk, I fell into so many, I started street singing, interestingly enough, which was where I bonded with Patti Scialfa and Soozie Tyrell.
On the street of New York.
Absolutely.
New York. So while this is 76, 77, late 70s, right? Pretty much.
I'm going to say 77 exactly was when I got
77. So the Stone Pony's been open. Bruce is on the cover of Time and Newsweek in 75. Born to Run explodes. The Jersey Shore is musically on fire. Are you paying attention to what's going on down there? Do you keep your links? Really?
Yeah, I was somewhere else. I was closer to CBGB's at that point.
Right.
If we're going to talk rock and roll. And I was also, I was really learning I was getting my chops together for being a background singer. And it wasn't really, I didn't really get plugged in to Down Here again until Patti got a call from Billy Rush. They needed some backup singers for Southside Johnny's record. And it was a big shock to him probably when I walked in as one of the three girls. So
stop there because I want you to go back. You said you met Patti and Soozie. You need to describe that. How does that happen? And be as precise as you can.
I shall.
Okay.
Patti Scialfa, I first laid eyes on when she had just gotten back from the David Sancious tour. And I lived in a place called The Ranch. Right. When I came back from Boston, and there was a rehearsal studio down there. And
describe and identify what the Ranch is.
Okay, the Ranch, interesting, was it was a suburban like ranch house with horse stables in the center of a very, very upper middle class Elberon neighborhood, but tucked away because there was a lot of foliage around it. And so you would walk up a long driveway or drive your car. And here was this sort of hippie haven run by James Fusco, who's sadly no longer with us. But he had a vision to basically grow crops, have horses, and rent out rooms. And I was renting one of the rooms, and that was it. And it was like, it was sort of like
the ranch house. There was an actual ranch house there, correct?
yes, it was, and with several rooms.
Yeah.
But it wasn't huge, it wasn't sprawling.
Right.
But it was lovely, and it was a great place to be when you were 20 years old and trying to get your stuff together.
And it seemed to be, if I recall correctly, I've never been there, but it was kind of like, for lack of a better term, almost like the headquarters for the scene, for the really hip people who would go out there and hang there, and this hippie enclave, if you will, in the middle, like you said, of suburban Jersey Shore living.
I wish I could pull out a photo. It's Life magazine worthy. It looks like we're some big happy commune with 100 people in the photo. And maybe I should get one of those to you.
You should. I'd love to see that. Yeah.
Was a copy.
Yeah. So bands would rehearse out there, correct?
That's it.
Yeah. So who would be out there? What kind of musicians? Name some Jersey Shore musicians who would be out there, and maybe what bands would be out there as well.
Well, David Sanchez, I think, rehearsed there, and Blackberry Booze Band that I can think of. This was a while ago. I'm not sure who else, but they used to have concerts there. I mean, they had tree stumps, and we'd sit out there in the woods and eat food. And
it reminded me of something that was happening or had been happening out in San Francisco, kind of like that whole countercultural thing, our own little thing on the Jersey Shore, this thing called the Ranch, which it sounds like it was probably a whole lot of fun, especially if you were a musician. So you were living there, and were you corresponding or working with any of the musicians at that point, or just?
Yeah, that's where I formed my jazz trio with this guy, Frank.
Oh, okay.
And also the Blackberry Booze Band. I moonlighted with them more or less. I don't think I was a steady member of that band at any point. But yeah, and and I was writing my journals. I wanted to be a writer like Anais Nin, so I was I have some records, that's why I'm writing a book, because I have these hilarious things where like I'm swimming in the sea of creeps, when club owners were going, do Helen Reddy, we're low cut. And I'm like swimming in the sea of creeps. I have these cartoons. It's hilarious. I mean, you really can't make it up.
Yeah. So go back now. So you talked about the Ranch, but talk about New York City, Soozie and Patti.
Okay, Soozie and Patti. We all kind of converged at a similar time. I'm not sure exactly who got there first, but I met Patti at the Ranch. I started to tell you the story about how I heard her play this song, Virginia Street. And she was right out of the box. Patti was a great writer, and I saw that and I felt that. And that day that I saw her play at the Ranch, I was just blown away. I think my mom was there and she was blown away too. And so I had met her on that one occasion, although we were not friendly around here. Then I moved to New York, and within a certain amount of time, I think she gave me a shout or I got a hold of her, I can't remember exactly. And she told me she had been singing in the streets with this girl, Soozie, on violin. And I said, well, I've been working with this band, the Bondini, in the streets, but I would love to moonlight with you guys. And she said, well, come with me. We'll go to this club, Peaches. Soozie's playing in a country band there. So I go up there, and Soozie's like 19. She's sleeping on a studio floor. I think I had a small shoebox on Central Park West, and Patti was staying, I think, on Fifth Avenue at this place called in a small efficiency. And so the next thing you know, I don't remember if it was a day later, we were at the Empire Diner at 2 a.m. rehearsing our songs because we had nowhere else to play, I guess. And we put together like a quick act. And the next thing you know, we were out on the streets singing for our supper. And we were just kind of very, I always suggest that we formed kind of a pyramid together because, we were these three, skinny hippie chicks from Jersey and confronting club owners that were getting dozens of cassette tapes. That's what we called them back then.
Yeah.
When we were together, we were just sort of powerful. You know, we were like 3 points, a pyramid. And I remember on one occasion, we just, club owners, we kept saying they were losing our tapes or something. So we just said, you know, we went in front of the door where I believe it was Kenny's Castaways. Now you might want to cut this out. I don't know. We won't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But we said, and we just stood out in front, and we got such a huge crowd that we were like blocking his entryway. And he had to come out and acknowledge us. We really, really had so much energy together. 3-part harmony, very precise. Patti on a Gibson guitar, a Guild, I'm sorry, with, you know, and she would like have this little pickup that you used gum, your chewed gum, and you attached it. And I played guitar once in a blue moon at that point in time, and Soozie was always on violin. But I was always clapping and stomping and playing drummer. And I don't know, we played in the West Village, and the boys loved us. And we would just stay out all night long like that with a bottle of wine, and, you know, sometimes, and to give us courage, and high heels and blue jeans, just rag mop, you know. It was just great. We just had so much, we validated one another in an almost perfect way. We were fearless.
So this is 77, 78, would you say?
I'd say 77.
77. So this is right around, you know, CBGB's is going off. The Ramones are there. The whole downtown New York scene is happening, not just in the Village there, but the East Village as well, of course. What kind of music are you playing? And were you guys writing stuff also?
I'd say dominantly was Patti's stuff. Patti, like I say, she came out the earliest of the three of us as a songwriter, although Soozie Tyrell's an incredible songwriter. And she has great poetry in her. She's an all-round artist. Very few people know. She does visual arts. She's incredible. But Patti just really had a clear identity and vision, I think, at that point. So we dominantly did her stuff, and we do covers. The Lion Sleeps Tonight, and we'd end up on the pavement, you know, sprawled out there, disgusting. But it was, like I say, we were going for broke, and so it was most Patti stuff, originals.
Did the trio have a name?
Trickster.
Trickster. Nice. Well, it sounds like we brought back tone and a moment of truth. We had to bring back Trickster.
You bet.
You bet. That would be fun.
We ended up playing one night. We were very sophomoric when we were together, and we had a lot of fun. And we walked down the street. You know, we'd go to the bakery, grab some baguettes, beat each other over the head with it. Hit me with your rhythm stick. We're walking down the street, and this was during what I call the urban cow crisis, where country music got really big in New York. And there was this place called City Limits. Yeah. I don't know if you visit.
I do, sure.
Two-stepping away in there and stuff. So this gorgeous cowboy, Carl Pandell was his name, and he was standing out on the corner watching us carrying on with our instruments, and we're beating each other over the head with bread. And he goes, "Hey, girls, why don't you come in here and sing for us?" So the next thing you know, the violin case is open, and we're performing for him. And the place was still full of people, and they were flipping out. So he said, "Hey, does any of you have a band? Do you want to play here?" And Soozie said, "Well, I have a band." And she had this kind of crossover pop country band that was great. And so these were all these great players like John Leventhal and John Gordon, and an incredible array of people came through this band. But Patti, so we became Soozie and High in the Saddle, and Patti and I were the satellites. Can you get cornier? Yeah.
So
that's the origin of taking it to the next level, I guess.
The reconnection to the Jersey Shore occurs, I presume, through Patti when she gets the call. Did you say she got the call, or Soozie got the call?
Billy Rush and she were friends, I think, from high school. And he said, "We heard you guys are great." I don't know, or we heard, or maybe he just commissioned Patti. And she said, "Well, I got these two friends." And so that became our first rock tour together.
So you guys go down to the shore. Are you recording then, or he needed you for a
We
tour?
recorded, and I can't remember if it was in Jersey or New York or where.
What album? What at least
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
Blackberry.
Okay, yeah. So Sacrifice. So is that the first time you're on a major record?
Major. Yeah, probably. That probably was.
Okay. So what's the tour like? Here are the three girls, right? You guys are the backup singers. It's crazy time. Everybody's young. What happens? What kind of what happens musically speaking? What happens to you? How do you adjust? How do you grow from this?
I learned how to sing without losing my voice with that many pieces in a horn section.
Oh.
That was a lesson, and I learned how to have a lot of fun on stage, jump around, be physical. It was fantastic. It was fun. Being on the tour bus was fun. I mean, Patti and Soozie and I were the perfect age to be embracing all those things, and the guys were a blast, you know. And we would dress them up in drag sometimes, just crazy things to entertain ourselves while we were going through cornfields in the middle of the night, and play cards, you know. And it was classic, you know. Just like I say, Patti, Soozie, and I formed our own, and I think it had something to do with that. It was still, and it still is, kind of, to a degree, and I can't say this across the board, but it was a male dominant culture.
Of course, no doubt.
Music was very male. I felt I couldn't get in that club, frankly, when I was down here. So I didn't even really try, because it was so male, and it was so they were so reinforcing one another that women were. I just feel like I could only be a spectator in that environment. But now here I was on a bus with them,
right.
And so it was very interesting. But Patti, Soozie, and I didn't. We just were strong together, and we always felt equal. We never got cowed or had to be. If anything, we probably terrified them.
Mm-hmm. You guys supported each other. Did you guys all room together too on the road?
I think we had separate rooms. Or I remember at points in time there would be two of us to a room, and then one, and we would rotate, that somebody would get, so they could talk to their boyfriends back in New York.
Right.
Get the one night alone, sort of thing.
What, again, as I asked you before, can you come up with one particular instance which kind of describes what life on the road was like with the Jukes during the Sacrifice tour?
Eddie
Mannion?
No, Eddie Mannion. He was my favorite. I loved him. I was saying Eddie. It could be Eddie.
Yeah, it could be Eddie. I thought you said
Eddie or Eddie, but it was heady. It was very heady. And I thought it would never end. It would never end. And then when it did end, after a couple of years, whatever it was, I just felt like I got dropped off on 42nd Street off that bus, and it was over, and the strings were cut. It was very frightening, because I thought it would never end. It was the rock and roll dream.
Sure.
And you know, I had enough naivete to fill a piñata. And you know, so I thought it would go on forever, and then it didn't. And then I segged into something completely different. I moved to Berlin, Germany, which is another whole story.
So before you do that, so do this trio Tricksters, that kind of dissipate after that? Patti goes her own way, Soozie
Well,
goes.
as a result, I think, of being on tour, like I say, when we got, Soozie still had a strong connection to New York, and as I recall, she had her own band there, and she was already back there performing by the time. I think they cut us down to 2 girls from 3 at one point. I'm not sure exactly why that happened, But Soozie was already reestablished in Manhattan with her own band. Patti, I'm not quite sure what happened, but she did end up coming down here, but was still, I believe, living in New York. And at that time, I had moved to Berlin, which is why I'm a little unclear about exactly what happened.
Berlin. I mean, how does that happen?
How does that happen?
Yeah, and why?
You're sitting in your apartment, you're oh so very sad, and all of a sudden you get a phone call from a friend who owned a place called the Cottonwood Cafe. There was a whole restaurant culture in Manhattan too around this time. And his name was, I always say his last name wrong, Stan Turkulski. He was a restaurateur and he had tortilla flats and the Cottonwood Cafe and all these Americana style restaurants. And he called me and he said, Lisa, I'm opening a Mexican restaurant in downtown Berlin and we want kind of a roots rock band. Do you have one? So of course I lied and I said, of course I have a band. And he said, what is it? I said, it's kind of a rockabilly, shockabilly / roots blues. And it was like, I just made it up. It was
you covered everything there. Right?
And so I ran around looking for a band. I had to be there in 2 weeks.
Wow. I
was dying to go to Europe. I hadn't been there yet. So I'd been to England once briefly, but not spent any real time. So I had a sax player and a Michael Jean from Buzz and the Flyers. He was a wonderful, real deal rockabilly guy, looked the part. I don't think he owned anything newer than 1954, I think, or something. His amps, his guitars, his clothes. And and I went over there and I picked up a rhythm section there. But the next thing you know, I'm on the cover of Tip and Zitty and in the arts section, or there are articles in there, or Morgan Post. And I'm like, my first day I'm being reviewed by very harsh German critics. And my favorite one was this. My favorite line was this: she's really a very good singer. It's too bad she is not black. And I was like, that's all, that's it. I'm not going to worry about this anymore. And you can't make it up. And I ended up staying there just because it fascinated me. And what I found was that after New York, which is just like, whoa, New York is so overwhelming, just to get into one little scene in New York is a big deal. But there I could just cross over. I mean, I was doing music on my 4-track. I brought a 4-track TIAC and a Hagstrom bass and guitar with me because they were light, those Hagstroms. Mm-hmm. And I started recording music for art galleries with one friend, and I was in a duo called The Righteous Sisters with Shelley Beal. I said, come on, let's tease up our hair and play on folk guitars. We'll play soul music, and we'll call ourselves The Righteous Sisters. I was doing things like that. And
this is all in Berlin.
Yeah, and jazz bands. I crossed over like in 15 minutes. I was doing all these different, and I liked, see, that's my downfall. I loved being eclectic. I loved, I never met a music I didn't like.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I got the chance to explore all those things and enjoy them. And I was writing a lot. I was always trying to write. And I've been very critical of my own writing. I wanted to write lyrics like Dylan, like be really good.
Mm-hmm. How long were you there?
I was there for about 2 years, I think, all told.
Wow. Did you speak German?
Ich spreche ein bisschen schlecht Deutsch.
Aha.
Nicht sehr gut, Schatzi. No.
So what brings you back then?
What brought me back was missing New York and feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to lose that little footprint I had there if I don't get back. I knew I wasn't going to become a European, but I wanted that influence. I wanted to experience a place that had much deeper roots than what was here. That meant a lot to me, to the inside of that. The wall was up. The feeling of the city was completely different than it is now. I had visited subsequently, and it was it was mind-blowing. It's like, it's likely that my people originally came from there too. You know, I think we
Yeah.
fled on my father's side. My mother's side is French Canadian, but my dad's was like Russian Jewish. And I have a feeling that we were Eastern Europeans, and I was feeling it in my DNA. I just got
Wow.
a lot from that.
So you do come back, you wind up back in New York. What's the next step musically?
Oh, good question. Oh, I came back with a boyfriend, and we had this band called the Funky Wallies. And I just ran into Rob Norris. He's from the Bongos. He was our bass player in that band. I just recently saw him for the first time in years. And so we performed a couple times, but we mostly we were on the machine. We got used to recording overlays, and we'd written this music that was, I guess you could say it was experimental, but I had a space echo and a drum machine and a 4-track TX. So we were recording in these overlays, and they were really hard to produce live, we found. But that's
So
not.
are you playing clubs and whatnot in New York at the time?
I went back to being a gal for hire as a background singer. I'm a little murky now. It's 80. Hold on a second. It's coming back. It's coming back in focus. I got involved with Soozie Tyrell again in a band called Venus Flytrap, yet another girl group. I've been in 4. So now we're Venus Flytrap. Venus Flytrap is Ramona Jan, Lisa Lowell, Soozie Tyrell, and at one point it was Sissy Sierra. And but Sissy went in and out, and I went in and out. So there were different configurations. But at one point, Soozie and myself and Ramona Jan decided we were going to do a busking tour, fly one way to London, England, and work our way from there to San Remo, Italy, through France, and live on the money we made in the streets. Now in New York, it was $100 a day. You know, we really could do it.
Yeah.
But in Europe, they were more used to, it was more of a panhandler thing, and they nickel-dimed you, just because that was the tradition.
Right. Yeah.
Not because they were cheap or anything. I don't mean to make that illusion, but the point is that when we got there, we were eating a lot of glacier, you know, for dinner. But then the wonderful thing that happened is that Soozie had relatives all over France. So we'd be in these little farmlands and like Issy-Jacques, little smaller towns, and near Carcassonne, and, you know, in the middle of France. And, you know, they were feeding us all these fabulous farm dinners. So we didn't starve the whole way. But I have stories to tell. I mean, it would take me an hour to tell you just the story about that tour and all the strange and wonderful things that happened.
How long does the tour last, and do you actually get to San Remo?
1 month, and we made it to San Remo. We
Wow.
took the boat from to Calais, from Dover, I guess it was.
Yeah, Dover.
And we played on the boat. We just would set up and start playing, and people just flip out. And we were colorful. I mean, I was wearing like a blue metal flake tutu, and I had my red Hagstrom, and Soozie just always looked fantastically French. That's all I'm going to say about that. She was really, really hot looking. And Ramona and I were a little the quirkier. We had it going on. It was,
yeah.
Like I said, I should give you some photos. They tell over 1,000 words. And so we did that. That was a 1-month challenge, one way tickets. We ended up flying back on the credit card. Okay. But there you go.
That's great. That's great. And now what happens next?
So we got back, and then we got a Village Voice Award for being the greatest street act that year. And then we played clubs. I think Sean Colvin and Soozie and I were playing at a lesbian bar on the Upper East Side called Spaghetti Western. It was a Western lesbian bar. You can't make it up. It was so incredible. And these women just loved us, and they were so nice to us. And the three of us would play with just guitar, violin, and guitar, and singing, 3-part harmony.
All right, well then you start to appear on Bruce records at some point too.
I did.
Nice.
And that was, the first record was, Soozie and I, Patti called us up and asked us if we would sing on Bruce's Lucky Town. And it was not, so we flew out to California, and we hung around for at least a couple weeks, if not a month. And Bruce was finishing up songs, and it was lovely to stay there and be part of that. That was very exciting. And that was the first time I worked with Bruce.
And then you also sang on Rumble Doll as well, Patti's album, right?
Rumble Doll.
Yeah.
That was great. And we had a mini tour out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
I love that album.
Yeah, it's a great record.
That album makes me cry. And I'm a tough old girl, but that album just made me weep sometimes because it was so tender.